We're here because Ryan Howard, your son, watched a video which we did a few weeks ago on Peter Carlo.
Oh boy.
And
Yeah.
Peter was a usher for about 10 years in his 60s and early 70s. And Ryan allowed us how he enjoyed the interview, but more importantly, reminded me that Dave Howard is probably the only man in history to have worked the stadium during the Expos, the Jammers, and now the Tarp Skunks. Unbelievable, but that's probably true.
Yeah, it started because of Ryan almost. Back in 1980, I believe. That was the first Babe Ruth World Series, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Right, 1980.
And the manager, general manager, was Tom O'Reilly, was he not?
Right.
And I got to know Tom because his job is not necessarily so much game day, but all season long when there's no season, all year long when there's no season, I should say.
Right.
And it's to go to different organizations and try to get sponsorships. And I got to know him pretty well, going to the Lodge and Kiwanis and some other things. I asked him, how because Ryan was about that age, Tom, how does somebody get to be a bat boy for the Expos? And he said, something just happened. A guy that was the clubby went off to college. It was in August, and they needed, and then so the senior member of the bat boy staff got his job for about 5 or 6 games. And he said, "Would Ryan want to do that for the end of this season?" And I said, well, he was standing right there, I think, actually, now that I think about it. And he got his eyes lit up, and he was ready to go. So he did it for the end of that season, and then he carried on
Really?
for quite a good number of years after, through a couple of general managers. The Bad Boys have various jobs. One of them is roughing up the balls with dirt, and that's a big thing. At least back then, that's what it was like. And after the game, I mean, they didn't have to do laundry. That was the clubby's job. But a lot of other things, with water, take care of the umpires, just different things. Whatever you see on TV, watch a baseball game, sort of take the balls out to the umpires, and that's what he did. And so I figured, well, maybe, because I wanted to go to a lot of games anyway while he was doing that.
Sure.
As a parent, really. And so I checked in, and I was able to get a job selling programs, ripping tickets at the gate, and a lot of different things. But the best thing is you get to meet a lot of people that you maybe don't know. And Jamestown is a people city. There's a lot of negatives maybe around Jamestown and stuff, but not as many as there were a few years ago. I think it's improving, and things are getting a lot better. And so I was doing that for a long time. And then I finally started working at Chautauqua, and I think that ended it a little bit. But now that Christian Dolce is here, I did it last year as a volunteer. There's a lot of volunteers that are involved down there. And without that, plus some community members that put some money into the team, it probably wouldn't be here. I don't think. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. And I think one other thing, that go back a little bit, 1994, we were very, very fortunate because our team became the Burlington or the Vermont Expos up there, near Montreal.
Correct.
In fact, Ryan's paycheck when he was working there wasn't gigantic, but it was for his age and what he was doing. And he worked with a lot of guys that are in the pros or were in the pros and
Sure.
now are retired even. Jamestown was going to be without a team back in 1994, but thanks to Major League Baseball, our stadium was not quite as bad in repair or in needs of certain lighting and maybe the warning track and maybe the locker rooms. It needed some updating. But Niagara Falls Rapids was in worse shape, and they didn't have enough money to, it appears anyway, to fix their stadium up. So Robert Rich and Mindy Rich, I think was the way it went, you can correct me here, knew probably Greg Peterson and a few people, and we got that team in that year, the exact same year that our team left. So that was tremendous. And then it moved along, and I just continued to work down there. I did get a little pay I didn't volunteer totally, but it was a kind of a money-making organization back in those days for Montreal. It was set up a little differently than our team is now. It's a shorter season, just July and August. No, June and July. And but we're seeing as good a players. They're only a year or two younger.
Absolutely.
The Tarp Skunks. So I'm looking forward to another season. But it was kind of because of Ryan and Tom O'Reilly and that I worked there a lot of years, and now I just know a lot of people down there just because of being around and people like baseball.
And people like you, Dave Howard. You're a little bit of everywhere all the time. The Forrest Gump of Jamestown. Well, tell me, just pause for a little second. Tell me about your mom and dad. Talk about,
In fact, Greg, the drugstore was on TV during the news, I think, last night, when it's the comic book store over on Fairmount Avenue.
Right.
And my dad, Milt Howard, was a pharmacist, and they had two pharmacies in town back a number of years ago, Davis Drugstore. There was Frank Gardner, Dick Purcell, and Sheridan Spicer. There was 4 pharmacists, 2 pharmacies, and 2 of them worked mostly in Faulkner, and the other 2, Dick Purcell and my dad, worked up in Jamestown. And then they sold number of years later, they sold the Faulkner one. And then Sheridan Spicer, I think, retired first, and then Frank Gardner. And so then my dad and Dick Purcell were left over at Davis Drug on Fairmount. And people still talk a lot about that drugstore because it had a soda fountain, good hot fudge sundaes, milkshakes, phosphates, and it was just a lot of fun.
By the way, for the camera, they'll never know what you just said about phosphates. What was that?
Well, or you could even have a vanilla Coke or cherry Coke. Phosphate is the fizziness of the water that comes out of it. You pull it out, and then they put in vanilla flavoring. And yeah, I don't know if you could go buy one right now if you wanted to. It's kind of like cream soda, but it's not the same. Not really the same. But people on the west side of town, a lot of people have come and gone that were customers but I still see a few people, older people, not that I'm any younger people either, but it was just a nice hangout. Sunday morning after various churches, place was packed. What do I want to say, manufacturers, I think it was in town, over on Jones and Gifford somewhere, they had accounts there, and people would come and pay their bill once, like the old-fashioned way, no credit card, just had a folder, kept track of people what they owed, and then they just paid it. It was certainly not like today. Fun place to be.
Did you work there?
My mother did, I did not.
Yeah.
I don't know why. And then people say, why didn't you become a pharmacist? Well, that's a good question. Probably because of the chemistry involved and some math. I didn't really pursue a degree in that. I went to Kent State thanks to my parents, and went to the business school and worked for a food broker for a number of years. But I didn't think I could handle the chemistry. He graduated from UB, and Dick Purcell went to Purdue. And I'm not sure about the other 2 fellas. That's what it was like growing up on Arlington Street in West Ellicott. My mother played ball with us because my dad was working some really long, weird hours. My dad always used to say, Yeah, I work, sometimes I work a half a day. You know, you think half a day, you think maybe 8 to noon. He means 9 to 9,
Yeah.
12-hour days. But my mother did a lot of the fatherly things, really, for my sister and myself.
And your mother's name was?
And Isabel, Izzy.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Good friends of Lyle and Gladys Peterson, I might say, of many years ago.
Because I remember going there. I remember my dad saying, you ever want to see what a cherry Coke, how that works? You know, because I had no idea, which really led to a Dr. Pepper obsession of mine because of that cherry Coke stuff. But it was all your dad doing that stuff and the ice cream. So I remember that. I remember that. Because you were the last of the Mohicans, really, Davis, to have that.
I think you're right. It was the spinning stools.
Yeah.
The phosphates were without a Coke in them. Yeah. And then if you wanted a Coke with vanilla or cherry those are the two main ones, then you would get that, and it just was because it was so fizzy. That was the best part about it. I'm glad you remember that.
So, David, a little bit about you. Now, you graduated from your high school?
Southwestern, 1964, and then some of those same guys went to Kent.
Why Kent State? What was the draw?
I don't know, except this same group of guys. Somebody must have got the urge or found out something, and there was about 6 of us, 6 or 7 that. It was close enough, but not too close, yeah. I think. Partially that. And actually, I was in Vietnam when the shooting took place in 1970 at Kent. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of a scary time. But I don't know what drew us there. Initially, we didn't go out and look at colleges like a lot of people do today. I will say, I'll give a plug for JCC. Many of us, maybe not each one, but most of us went to JCC for 2 years. And then went to Kent the other 2 years. Okay. And my wife Pat and our 2 kids, Heather and Ryan, went to JCC. That's a good school to go to.
No question.
And for our area particularly, and now they have dormitories and many things transfer, most things transfer. So it's a really one of the better, as far as not necessarily the biggest, obviously, but one of the better SUNY schools around.
So you went to JCC, then you went to Kent. What did you major in at Kent? Kent State?
Marketing. They have a new marketing building. I'd like to go out there where it used to be right near the front of the campus, the old one. Anyway, then I went there, and then I had a nice piece of mail, Greg. Greetings when I got home. I had to take one class in the summer of 1968. So I did that, and my parents picked me up. And went to the graduation August, and I was at Fort Dix in September. That's when the draft was viable.
Do you remember your number, draft number?
Well, not the number that got me drafted, but I remember 517800188 was my, and I became an R8 because I gave them an extra year of school, so I could get a school. It wasn't any guarantee you wouldn't be able to, or wouldn't have to go to Vietnam. It wasn't that. But at least if you did go, as the needs were met in the military, you maybe wouldn't be out as in grunt in the infantry. You'd be back in field a little bit better. So I went to stenographer school at Fort Benjamin Harrison, which is now closed, I believe, but it's Indianapolis. I was at Fort Sheridan, and I went to Fort Riley, Kansas. That's where everybody went. It's kind of funny. I think everybody in the country, I don't think they had another school getting people ready for Vietnam. However, it was in the winter when we went. I did anyway, February. It wasn't like the weather over there, because it was muggy and it wasn't a nice situation. Even if you had a good situation militarily, a lot of the other stuff wasn't so much fun. But I will say this, Greg, I probably never would have signed up, like Ryan didn't go in the military. And I don't think I would have probably had, unless somebody else did too, and I tagged along or something. But normally I don't think I would have signed up. But once I got drafted, it was one of the best things that happened to me. Mm-hmm. As far as learning, one thing, when you get out of college, you don't have to find a job, whether it's your permanent job or not, because you got 3 years I had to give. So I was 25 when I was out looking for work. And so there was a lot of good things about it. You learned how to be a man earlier, maybe, and met a lot of people. I sure would like to run into a couple of them now.
You sent overseas? Did you go to Vietnam?
Yeah, I was there for 10 months.
10 months? So tell me about your experience there.
Because of my military MOS, military operations specialty, I was a military stenographer, which was one little notch above a clerk typist.
Right.
And you had to learn shorthand and typing and things. It was a little bit less strenuous if you were a clerk typist. So I worked for the deputy commanding officer out in Vietnam, where I was located.
Whereabouts in Vietnam? Where are you looking?
Quang Tri, Quangtri. And it was way up north, right along the demilitarized zone. You could look it up. I mean, it's on maps and things. It wasn't real big, but the Marines had been there before. And then a couple of years before I went, our unit went in from Fort Carson, Colorado. And then I was there doing whatever you might see people doing in those days in an office. There wasn't any women there doing it, but it was men. The only person higher than Colonel Hodes was the Major General. That was the commander of the unit. I had a stint that was kind of nice at the end. I was at Homestead Air Force Base for about 6 months for the end of my military, because I had a little time left, and so they put me down there, and that was kind of nice, right outside of Miami, and that was a good experience there.
So when you were in Vietnam, that 10-month period, did you get a sense of the morale of the troops at that time? I mean, I realize you're in an office setting, so you see a lot of paperwork, you get a lot of directives and stuff like that. But did you get a sense of how things were going
Well,
at that time?
I didn't personally. Well, there was some incoming rockets and things, not really right exactly where we were, but I knew a lot of people in my unit that were. One guy only had a couple days left, and he was going to leave, and he was killed. I can't think of his name, and that wasn't good. It's not like MASH on TV in a way, but probably there are some things that might be. I'll throw a little aside that we got to see a couple of shows, USO shows and things that like Bob Hope did, and we didn't see him personally. I think he went to the bigger places where there was a bigger area to perform, but that was, people were, treated, they didn't like the war in Vietnam back then, the everyday citizen, but the people that helped out the situation, like some entertainers and things like that, that made it palatable, really.
Did you get a sense of the politics of it all at the time?
Our unit was so close to North Vietnam, and the ARVNs, they called it ARVN, that was the Vietnam, it's north and south. That was the South Vietnamese, the ARVNs, and they were part of our unit. They had colonels and all that kind of stuff, and we worked together. But the ones just over the border, they're the ones that we were fighting against, really. Then Laos was involved in there, but I didn't really get to see a lot of that because I was fortunate to be back at home base, you might say.
Yeah.
Gary and Greg Mong, M-O-N-G, I went to high school with them, twin brothers. And one of them was there in Vietnam when I was, and then the next one took his place. They didn't both go at the same time, and they ran a PX in Cat Lai, C-A-T-L-A-I, and somehow I got to use one of our funny phones there and talk to him and set up where I got a ride down there in a helicopter.
Really?
I got to know, when you're in that, I mean, I didn't know a lot of high-level people, but people that, that were going down maybe to Long Binh or somewhere to take some passengers or pick up people or something, I was able to hop in and got to go see those guys. It was just kind of weird.
Yeah.
And I did the same thing one time with Ward Anderson, who's from here.
Yeah, yeah.
You probably knew his dad or know Ward even maybe.
Yeah.
And so, shenanigans go on all the time, I guess. That trip down there, because, you had to fly down. I don't know, I was probably taking a chance even.
Yeah.
It was one of those bigger type helicopters. And I don't know, it's just kind of, things just happened. The best things that happen are not planned.
Never.
I had a dog there,
Really?
Yogi, and I didn't get to bring it home, or maybe the Yogi died before I came home. Little puppy, and I don't know how that happened, but it came around, and so we fed the dog, and it stayed with us, and that was fun. That was fun having a dog there.
So you come back, and now that you're kind of mustered out from the service, did you know what you were going to do next?
Not really. I'll tell you the odd thing, another thing that's kind of interesting. I was able to get a job at, there was two of them, and one was MRC. And I worked in production control down in Falk. I could tell because I'm not inclined that way, but I took the job because I, wanted to have a job. And I'm not sure what the situation was back then exactly. I don't remember. But if you got a chance to get a job at SKF now, but MRC back then, you took it. But before about a year went by, and there's blueprints and a lot of things that doesn't fit me. They opened up a plant in Georgia, and it's still there, I think. So they had to take a lot of the work down there to that new plant, and so a few of us got laid off, which was me. So that really wasn't that bad because I wouldn't have made out there in the long haul. Then there was another job that I got at ABM, somewhat after that first job. And I worked in sales. Now, that was more up my alley. And I got to do a couple of meetings and trips that I never would have done before nationally. It's back when the readings and people like that, and they were making a machine for Venezuela. And there was a lot of things going on down there, it's even sad today to drive by there and not see it there anymore on Jones and Gifford Avenue. As fate would have it, they opened up a plant in South Carolina, which is still there. Again, there was a few guys that they didn't need up in learning the sales stuff up in Jamestown. But I got to travel with some of the salesmen. They used representatives. They didn't have a sales force. They used sales representatives. One guy I remember pretty well was Gene Barnes in Stewart's Draft, Virginia. So I got to go down there a few times and work with him. And training really is what it was. But then when that plant was opened up in South Carolina, well, then they didn't need me so much. So then, it was kind of around the ice storm. We had a terrible ice storm around the blizzard of 77, but it was before that. Yeah. And there was an ad in the paper for a food broker, which I didn't know a lot about food brokers, from Buffalo, G.R. Bennett Company. And so that I applied for it, and Ray Metzger came down from Buffalo. Terrible weather. Wow, it was brutal. And he met me at the Gaslight.
Oh, yeah.
And we talked. And they hired me. I don't know why, maybe, but took me on, and I worked there about 20 years. And I enjoyed it a lot. And their office was up in Buffalo. I didn't have to go up there all the time. Worked around here in Olean, Salamanca, and Corning, and down into Pennsylvania too, representing their products that they didn't make, but it was products that they were. So the companies like Uncle Ben's Rice, LaChoy, Welch's, Clorox, some of the companies that are big, well-known companies, but it's expensive to keep a whole fleet of guys on the road. all the time. So then they would hire brokers and pay a percentage of what we sold. I didn't work in the retail. I worked in the retail, not in the wholesale end. So they would go to Quality on Jones and Gifford, or our company had a crew that would do that, and then go down to Super Duper down at Faulkner, and the Wegmans and all the plants up, or all the stores up there. Not stores, I don't mean, but warehouses, and sell the products. And then once they got into the warehouse, then it was up to us, the retail force, to get that product on the best part of the shelf, if we could do it, and then just try to keep it moving. So then they had to reorder more, and then they'd reorder more, and then our company would make money doing that. That's the way brokers worked. There's not as many around anymore. I think it might be done a little differently now. I can go into a store now in town, Wegmans or Tops or somebody, and you don't see too many salesmen. They were crawling back in those days.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's the way that went. But then right about the week or two or so after I got hired, we had a monthly meeting in Buffalo, and the guy that hired me, Ray Metzger, hired also another fellow. Maybe he'd already been working, but he was from Olean, and then the blizzard came Friday afternoon, and so we did our best to race. We're getting out of here. So we were all three of us going through Buffalo, where the weather was terrible. It was blowing, and I've never seen anything quite like it.
Yeah.
And we followed him to his house, met his wife, and his kids. His kids were small then, and we stayed there for like the 4 days because you really couldn't go anywhere. Yeah. We had to leave our cars, I think, somewhere even. I don't remember the whole story on that, but that blizzard was something. And so we, right after he hired us, we took root in his house for a while.
Yeah.
So that's the way it worked. And then after that, then I started working at the post office in Lakewood. I've got a lot of little diddlies that I've done over the years. And
now currently you're a substitute teacher.
Yeah, that's the end. I'm finishing. I was at Washington today, and I don't know how long I'll keep doing it, but I'm enjoying it like crazy. Seeing these kids, they come to go full circle. They come down to the stadium.
Yeah.
Russell E. Dietrich Jr. Park, I might say, and as I don't want to leave Russ out of this. And then they're just busy with kids. The way it's really I'm trying to not necessarily promote them, but I am really. It's a reasonable event for an evening.
Well, it's inexpensive, and you're the consummate promoter of a lot of things. You have in your pocket right now. You gave me one here. Candy. You are the candy man. Everybody kind of knows if you're going to greet David, all of a sudden some kid walks by, you end up with a candy thing.
There's one more right there for the audience.
There it is for the camera. Perfect. Leave it right there because I don't be consumed. So how did you get into that?
Well, it goes back to G.R. Bennett. We represented Brock's Candy, and the way they sold candy, at least in some stores back in those days, were in bins, and they had different flavors, like caramels are in this one, and whatever, there might be 20 in a bin or 30, and then people would pick up, they call pick-a-mix, and you pick what you wanted, it went into a bag, and they weighed it, and away you went. Okay. Well, then our job was to keep it rotated, and if it got a little bit of a date problem, not even, so it's still good, but we had to get it out of the store, and then take it back to Buffalo, but we got a little bit of it to take home with us. And I started giving it out, and that was a long, long time ago, and I just still do it, and I enjoy it, because then just now when I was leaving Washington, I went down Sturgis Street, and I saw about 5 kids that I had seen in school earlier. I don't do too much of it in school, although they attack me sometimes and say, got any candy? Because they've heard about it, either because of church, where I give it out there, or just the word gets around. And so it was like a parade, because those guys stayed on the sidewalk, but then I flipped a little bit of candy out to them, and they dove for it. And it's just it's a hobby. I guess that's what I would call it for me. It's just a hobby.
But there was a Babe Ruth World Series player who subsequently went on to the Kansas City Royals named Dave Howard. Did your paths cross with this?
Well, yeah, because I when it's in the paper, you follow what teams are there. Interesting enough, a team from Japan is coming this year.
Really?
That's interesting that I just heard about. Well, the name was right there, Dave Howard. I said, I got to find him. And so I went down and I met his family. And he played for Kansas City for one. He played for some other teams.
Yeah.
And he might have been a manager involved too, maybe Sarasota. But yeah, I did meet him and talk to him. I've got a few of his baseball cards. And that was kind of interesting. It's not a rare name, but it's not exactly common. And so I had to meet him. And that was a good experience. It really was. I enjoyed that. And I'm trying to think what year that was. Was that in the 80s, maybe? 90s, maybe.
But you've met a lot of interesting people. Do you remember any of the players that either Ryan or you may have kind of, whether they were the Expo days, the Jammer days, some players that may jump out at you as who you kind of got a little more close than others?
Well, Ryan, we have a nice picture. Well, we've got multiples of this picture now. I had them made. Mark Grudzielanek.
Oh, yeah.
He went from the Expos to the majors, and then he played for the Montreal. And then I got a nice picture of Ryan and him. That's memorable. But I do remember one guy. We went to Cooperstown on a bus trip with Eleanor. I think it was Eleanor. Eleanor, she had the travel.
Eleanor
Yeah. She put it together, and Lois Blackman was involved.
Sure.
Some great old-time fans. We went to the Oneonta Yankees game one day, and that's real close to Cooperstown.
Right.
And we stayed 2 nights, and I think 2 nights, and then we went and watched the Expos play in Doubleday Field.
Ah.
And the reason I kind of brought that up, I bet that's probably quite a thing for players, because not all baseball players get to play there, I don't think.
No.
It was just a fortunate thing. But they happened to fit it into the schedule for some reason. I can't remember what the reason was. But do you remember when Jamestown had a player with 6 fingers? Can't think of his name. He was a relief pitcher, and he made it into the majors. And we knew his name back then. I can't say what it is now. I think he had 6 on each hand.
6
And
fingers, okay.
the interesting thing about him, and I can't think of his name, but that'll be for the next edition, maybe, if I can get that name.
Yeah, exactly. Do some research, yeah.
Sports in general, it's kind of interesting. We went down to Ryan's for one round, or the first round. He lives near Greensboro, and we went to the Coliseum there when the first round of the basketball NCAA tournament this year.
Oh, really?
And there's 6 games that are played the first weekend, but we parked there. And, well, we had to get there some early, so there was a car of guys in another car, and we wound up talking to them. Sports in general bring people together.
Yeah.
These 2 guys, this one guy, Ryan didn't know him, and he didn't know us, but he worked at a hospital fairly close to Ryan and knew of the situation of the supply chain. And it's just interesting how if we could get the world to get a common denominator, and how great it would be to just not have battles and wars and people dying and everything.
Right.
And sports seems to be one of those things that, because you can argue about players and this and that and have some disagreements, but when it's all said and done, everything gets together in a nice snowball, and it's good.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. I should give a little credit here to Mike Ferguson, because he had a big doings one, just I don't know what 2000. He called me the employee of the millennium, And he had Scott Kinberg taking a picture, and it was in the paper, and he had a trophy. Like
Yeah.
he made it pretty big, and there is a guy we can talk about him another time. There's a good promoter type guy right there, Mike Ferguson. He was the general manager for a long time. Ryan also got to go up with him and another young lad named Schweb Zombie, something like that, and work with Mike with the Buffalo Blizzard when he was up there. And so again, baseball, it just draws quality at not a real huge price. Yeah.
Well, you're a quality guy, Dave, and I'm just so glad. I'm glad you came in today. I'm glad your son suggested it, and I'm glad to get your story. Before we get done here, I'm going to put a hat on you, I'm going to take a picture of you, and I'm going to turn you into a baseball card.
Oh, Greg, I will say that I always used to kid anybody that knew Greg and knew Channel 1301 or whatever it was, and before that it was a 3-digit number, and we liked what you do for the community with equipment. You got some of it from Gladys, I think, or some other family members, but you're a good person for that kind of stuff, really. And you do it well. You really do it well. You came up with some good questions that I wasn't thinking of, I'll tell you, Greg. You did a little research. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.